the difference is not much about economic engineering or academic economics, but it's about how economists, they can deal with concerns, not so, let's say, pragmatic, but sometimes concerns regarding human fears and hopes and desires and needs and loves and lives, things that are not very easy to be quantified, but they're very important.
Economics is like water systems, that water goes down to the lower level by nature. So there are several rules or laws that goods, price, and so forth moves and affect people. But economic engineering is trying to make fences or trying to affect the movement of water by putting some forces or devices to that.
You have a theory first and an idea first, and then sometimes it takes a while to figure out what to do with that idea. Like you think something valuable will come of it, but we don't know immediately. Policymakers don't have the luxury of time. So policymakers have to make economic policy today, every day, even if they don't have an economic theory or a new idea to guide them.
We have academic economics, which has, really become highly abstracted from the realities of embedded life, embodied behavior. And then when we talk about translating those economics into policy, the opportunity there is that policy finds a way to collide with reality. And when it collides with reality, it can be tuned in a way that is helpful to everybody.
Policymakers have to take the world as it is. And a simple fact of life is that fundamental uncertainty is everywhere. It has to deal with a fundamentally uncertain world where we're not quite sure, the data's contested, the models we've got to use are contested, and you usually have limited resources and not much time to come up with an answer. That's policy making. Okay, in theory terms, well, we've kind of abstracted from some of those difficulties.
When you think about the world, you can say, oh, let me abstract from the wind and the friction of the air, and let me assume, how things would work in a vacuum and so on. When you do engineering, you cannot assume that there's a vacuum and there's no friction of the air. You have to design for things as they are. As I like to say, there's no such thing as a perfect suit. There's only such things as a perfectly tailored suit. And engineering questions involve a lot of tailoring.
Aeronautical engineers are required to ensure the plane stays up in the air and doesn't crash and kill hundreds of people. Economists don't have that kind of accountability and don't apply the same level of, if you like, scientific rigor to their theses, to their hypotheses that aeronautical engineers do. The aeronautical theory that holds the engineering is good theory. It's proved, it's been tested, and so on. The theory that upholds the engineering undertaken by a government is not as sound and as rigorous, in my view.
We have a school of policy making here at Harvard, and the students study economics as a guide to policy making, and often they find when they're trying to actually make policy, it's a lot more complicated than it was in the classroom. And while economics can be a useful source of insight, it has to be supplemented by an understanding of sociology and group behavior and culture and government and politics.
To use economics as a means to not just play around with spreadsheets or forecasting models, but really bring it into the way that policymakers make decisions, understand options, understand the costs of different options of going forward. So I think if the idea that there are major differences between economics as an academic exercise versus economics is a policy-making exercise, I think the more that we bring them together, the more useful it can be.
Economic science is very much focused on complexity and trying to attain as much understanding of complexity as possible. Economic engineering is much more blunt. It doesn't have as much fidelity as economic science, and we should always be trying to match the level of complexity of economic science with the complexity of policy making and engineering.
The difference is the conceptual scope, I think, the time horizon. Politics is a response to the urgencies of the day. It is animated by grievances, by contestations, by the need to solve conflicts. This binds politics to the short view. Economics, being a science, should supply the long or the longer view.